cut off my audio. Hey, what's up, everyone? Thank you for joining us. This is Dan at Unicorn Riot. Glad to be with you all. So we saw here today, earlier, the Department of Justice gave a kind of rare press conference and saying that they're going to enter into a consent decree. They're going to supposedly have an agreement with the city of Minneapolis about its policing practices. They also said that there were patterns and practices showing, racist behavior at the Minneapolis police. This comes as little surprise to the activists in the Twin Cities who have seen a whole myriad of different abuses of power, racist policing practices experienced, documented. It seems like the DOJ did take certain incidents as crystallizing examples of the kind of practices they were concerned about. So we've got the post up on unicornriot.ninja. I'll put that over. There we go. Sorry about my audio. So we got this report up on our website. We got the post up on unicornriot.ninja. Got my microphone back. And so the Department of Justice found racist discrimination practices in the Minneapolis Police Department, that they were unlawfully discriminating against Black and Native Americans at disproportionate rates. And after racist incidents, police were not accountable for racist conduct. So right now we're waiting. There's supposed to be a webinar starting in sometime around now. But it hasn't happened yet. But they're basically going to supposedly be laying out some of the more facts, probably walking through some more incidences of the case. And so we might have Nico come on here in a little bit, because Nico was at both the government press conference and at the press conference that a lot of community members were at. We had folks like Michelle Gross and Jess Sundin, a lot of activists who have called attention to these problems in Minneapolis for quite an extended period of time. So right now we're just going to be waiting on that webinar thing to start. I also kind of thought we could maybe play some clips from back during the Uprising, some of the edited work that Unicorn Riot put together. Obviously, we followed Unicorn Riot's a nonprofit media group. We started in 2014, and we've obviously followed a lot of the incidences that happened before George Floyd, like the fact that all of these things kind of added up together, almost snowballed or culminated in the 2020 uprising, but were certainly aspects of things that were that built up over a long period of time. And I think that at least what we did see from the government today was some admission that that's the case, that they can't just simply deny that that was the case. So again, we are going to wait on a webinar that's supposed to start anytime now. And so we also had a pretty long press conference with the community members. It ran more than an hour. That clip is up on our website as well. And so you can check that out if you want to sort of see a longer cut of what happened there. So if you give me one moment, please. So we're glad to be back here with you, doing another video composition live stream. Haven't done one of these in a minute, and we want to try to call attention to and sort of show that a lot of what the community was talking about was that it wasn't just simply the George Floyd Derek Chauvin encounter by itself. It was a pattern of practices. The DOJ is admitting it was a huge pattern of practices that and beyond simply this one incident, and that's why they're forcing there to go to a consent decree. But what we also saw was that members of the community are basically saying that they are expecting to have okay, we do finally have access to the webinar, so I'll be bringing that over to you momentarily. Thank you all for joining us. We're going to get that working really quickly. I appreciate it. Just give me 1 second, folks. Thank you. Sorry, folks. I'll just get the audio cross-wired. Just give me 1 moment, please. We should be all set now, people. Thank you for that. Thank you for your patience. This is live right now from the webinar.
Relying on the diverse communities in this vibrant city to stay engaged and to work with us to create a safer, more just Minneapolis. Now you'll hear from members of our team about the various findings in our investigation. We'll go through each area of the investigation and summarize what we found. And we'll start that with our findings regarding excessive force. And for that, I'll turn things over to my colleague, Beatrice Aguirre.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Beatrice Aguirre. I am a trial attorney at the Civil Rights Division in Washington, D.C., and I'll be talking to you today about our use of force findings. We have reasonable cause to believe that MPD uses excessive force in violation of the Fourth Amendment. We reviewed how MPD uses deadly force. That included 19 police shootings and 1 in-custody death from 2016 to 2002. A significant portion of these incidents were unconstitutional uses of deadly force, and our use of force experts spotted serious tactical concerns in many of them. In many instances, MPD officers discharged their firearms without assessing whether there was a threat justifying the use of deadly force. MPD officers use neck restraints, often without warning, on people suspected of committing low-level offenses and people who pose no threat. MPD officers often use neck restraints in situations that didn't end in an arrest. And on June 9th, 2020, MPD changed its policy to ban the use of all neck restraints in chokeholds. This positive step met considerable resistance among MPD officers, and we identified a reported neck restraint and an unreported neck restraint after that ban. With regards to tasers, MPD officers use tasers in an unreasonable and an unsafe manner. MPD officers do not appear to use tasers consistent with policy, sometimes without warning. Officers used multiple successive taser applications without reassessing the need for further activations. There were also taser uses for minor offenses or for pain compliance and on people with behavioral health issues. As for the use of bodily force, we found that MPD officers use bodily force in ways that are unreasonable. MPD officers aggressively confront people suspected of low-level offenses or no offense at all. And they use force if the person does not immediately obey. Officers sometimes use force against people who were already compliant or handcuffed. And in many instances, MPD officers shoved people, including bystanders, for no legitimate reason. Our review of incidents involving chemical irritants or pepper spray revealed that MPD officers often use pepper spray without justification in an unreasonable and sometimes retaliatory manner. Because MPD officers sometimes spray groups of people to disperse them and need not summon a supervisor unless someone is injured, the actual number of people who were pepper sprayed is higher than the number of incidents. We also identified violations of the Fourth Amendment in incidents involving youth. In several incidents, officers did not use age-appropriate de-escalation or any de-escalation at all to avoid the use of force. When the officers do use force, the type of force they use is not proportional to the threat, if any, that the young person presented. These uses of force against youth were unnecessary and harmful to their physical and emotional well-being. MPD officers routinely disregard the safety of people against whom they have used force or people who are already in their custody. We saw incidents where officers minimized complaints of medical distress or denied medical aid, including life-saving aid. We also saw instances where the arrestees or the subjects of force complained that they could not breathe or that they were in pain. And officers often minimized or disregarded those concerns. Officers also treated restrained detainees roughly in an evident disregard of their safety. We observed a pattern of MPD officers failing to intervene to prevent unreasonable force, despite MPD's policy requiring the officers to do so. And with that, I'll turn it over to my colleague, Megan Marks, who is going to discuss our findings regarding racial discrimination. Thank you.
Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Megan Marks, and I am an attorney in the Civil Rights Division in the Department of Justice. So the second area where we made findings today involves racial discrimination. We found reasonable cause to believe that MPD engages in racial discrimination in violation of the Safe Streets Act and Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. These statutes prohibit law enforcement practices that have an unwarranted disparate impact upon race, unless there is a substantial, legitimate, non-discriminatory justification. We made several findings related to discriminatory policing. First, MPD disproportionately stops Black and Native American people and patrols neighborhoods differently depending on the racial composition of the neighborhood without a related safety rationale. We looked at stops occurring from November 1st, 2016 to August 9th, 2022 to assess whether there were racial disparities in MPD's enforcement activities. We estimate that MPD stopped Black people at 6.5 times the rate at which they stopped white people, and stopped Native American people at 7.9 times the rate at which they stopped white people, given their shares of the population. We also found that in neighborhoods where fewer white people live, MPD initiated a significantly larger portion of its traffic enforcement stops for only minor reasons, like providing false information to an officer. As the percentage of people in a neighborhood that were white increased, we found that traffic stops there targeted more serious activity. Second, MPD discriminates during stops when deciding whom to search, searching Black and Native American people more frequently than white people who are engaged in similar behavior. We found racial disparities in search rates. For example, after May 26, 2020, MPD searched people 22% more often during stops involving Black people than during similar stops involving white people. Similarly, MPD searched people 23% more often during stops involving Native American people than during stops involving white people in similar circumstances. We also found disparities for vehicle searches, with MPD searching vehicles during stops involving Black people 37% more often than during stops involving white people. Third, we found that MPD disproportionately uses force against Black and Native American people. MPD used force against Black people at 9 times the rate and against Native American people at 13.9 times the rate that it used force against white people, given their shares of the population. And at almost every type of force that we looked at, Black and Native American people experienced it at statistically significant higher per capita rates than white people. So the findings that we reached today in this area are the first time that we've made a finding about discrimination in the use of force based on race. And our findings today are also the first time that we found a pattern or practice of discrimination against Native American people by law enforcement in the stops and searches that I described earlier. Fourth, we found that the percentage of stops for which MPD officers documented race sharply declined following George Floyd's death, and MPD failed to take appropriate action to address those policy violations. So starting in late May 2020, officers suddenly stopped reporting race and gender in a large number of stops, despite an MPD policy requiring officers to collect data on race. This sudden decrease in MPD officers recording racial data continued throughout the next 2 years of our review period. Fifth, and finally, MPD has failed to sufficiently address racial disparities, missing race data, and allegations of bias. MPD and city leadership have been on notice about racial disparities. The community, oversight officials, public defenders, government entities, researchers, and the press have long raised concerns about discrimination by MPD through a variety of means, but MPD did not sufficiently address those problems. So all of these things together have led to diminished community trust in MPD, and together represent a pattern or practice of unlawful discrimination on the basis of race. So I will now turn it over to my colleague, Katie Chambly-Ryan, who will discuss our findings regarding the First Amendment.
Thanks, Megan. I'm Katie Chambly-Ryan. I'm also an attorney at the U.S. Department of Justice in Washington, D.C., but joining from Minneapolis today. With respect to the First Amendment, we found reasonable cause to believe the city and MPD are violating people's rights by retaliating against protected speech in a number of different ways that violate the First Amendment. We assessed MPD's protest misconduct by reviewing hundreds of body-worn camera videos from 22 different protest events from between 2016 and the present. We also looked at thousands of documents, including the protest planning materials that MPD used, as well as its internal policies and trainings about protests and crowd control tactics. We also spoke to scores of individuals who had information about how MPD responded to protests, including protesters themselves, journalists who attended protests, community advocates, attorneys in relevant litigation, and MPD supervisors and line officers. And we looked at publicly available evidence, like evidence submitted during litigation and videos and accounts from citizens and journalists. And looking at all of that together, we found that MPD violates people's First Amendment rights in 4 ways. First, MPD officers regularly retaliate against protesters, and they particularly do that by using force. We found repeated examples of excessive force, and this happened both to people who were abiding the law during protests and also people who were violating the law in some way, but did not present any threat that justified the level of force that officers used. Routinely, MPD officers used indiscriminate force. Particularly, they used blast balls and 44 millimeter projectiles. Indiscriminate force means force with no particular target, encompassing both people who are violating the law and people who aren't, people who pose a threat and people who are not. We also saw retaliatory force that was intended to punish at large-scale protests focused on policing, but also at smaller events that address other things like encampments for unhoused people. The second thing that we found is that MPD officers retaliate against journalists. And we also found that they unlawfully restrict journalists' actions during protests. We saw officers use retaliatory force against the press. And we also saw that MPD officers would enforce dispersal orders and curfews against the press, even when the curfew had an explicit carve-out for members of the media. This is a big problem because it prevents the press from reporting on how police respond to the protests and how they enforce the dispersal orders and curfews themselves. Third, in regular stops and calls for service, we saw MPD officers penalize people who challenged or questioned them. This violates the law because people have a right to criticize officers, even if they don't do it politely and even if they do it with profanity. It's protected speech. Nevertheless, MPD officers regularly respond to that protected speech with arrest and also with force. Finally, we found that MPD officers retaliate against people who observe them and people who record them. That violates the law. As long as it doesn't actively interfere with police conduct, people have the right to observe police officers and to express views about it, even if it causes an officer a momentary distraction. People also have the right to record police activity. Nevertheless, MPD officers regularly both obstruct people's ability to see them and to record them, and they retaliate with force when they do so. These violations come from MPD's deficient policies and training, but also from accountability failures. Despite the repeated misconduct that we saw at protests between 2016 and the present, MPD's only disciplined officers for conduct in protests in connection with 5 incidents over that whole 7-year period. We also saw repeated expressions of contempt for First Amendment rights by line officers, supervisors, and members of the SWAT team. With that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Kristen Rao, who will talk about our findings under the Americans with Disabilities Act.
Good afternoon. My name is Kristen Rao. I'm an assistant United States attorney at the U.S. Attorney's Office here in Minneapolis. I'm pleased to have the opportunity to tell you about our ADA findings. We have reasonable cause to believe that the city and MPD violate the Americans with Disabilities Act in their response to people with behavioral health disabilities. Our investigation showed that that can occur in 2 ways. That can be people with behavioral health disabilities receiving a police response when it's not appropriate. It can also be the nature of the police response that people with behavioral health disabilities receive once they are in contact with police. In sum, we concluded that the city and MPD do not provide equal opportunity for people with behavioral health disabilities to benefit from crisis response services. The result of that is real trauma. It's real injury. It's death to people experiencing behavioral health issues in Minneapolis. We concluded that these harms could be avoided by dispatching behavioral health responders where that's appropriate. And those harms can be mitigated by sending behavioral health responders with police where a law enforcement response is needed, but a behavioral health issue is occurring and might merit a response of qualified professionals. To arrive at this conclusion, we analyzed a sample of certain behavioral health calls received by 911 to which MPD responded. And for the vast majority of these calls, it was clear that the person in need of behavioral health attention was not reported to have a weapon, did not pose an immediate threat to themselves or others. And this was apparent looking at the data in a number of ways. For example, we observed that only 0.45% of over 100,000 calls associated with behavioral health issues resulted in an arrest at the scene, underscoring that the current police-led response to behavioral health issues is occurring when no law enforcement or a more limited law enforcement response is appropriate. In December 2021, the city launched a pilot, the Behavioral Crisis Response Program. And that provides a behavioral health response in addition to or instead of a police response. That program, we recognize here tonight and in our report as well, that was a positive development. It was a step in the right direction, but it did not go far enough because it still lacks the capacity that's required to be an effective alternative to a police-led response. We participated with ride-alongs with BCR responders, as did our clinical expert. And that was a clear conclusion to us. MPD continues to be the primary response to behavioral health calls. So despite the launch of that pilot, the issue remains. Now, MECC, which is Minneapolis' 911 dispatch center, also contributes to necessary police responses to calls involving behavioral health issues. More training, quality assurance for behavioral health calls, and coordination with other actors and first responders, as well as the new 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline, will assist in dispatching behavioral crisis responders when appropriate. Another problem we observed that contributes to the violations of ADA that we found is that crisis intervention training and other training on behavioral health issues is not adequate to equip officers to appropriately respond to people with behavioral health disabilities when they are on scene. For example, we saw training that was not clinically accurate, or training that could lead officers to believe that force might be inevitable against people with behavioral health issues, or that they're inherently dangerous individuals. Likewise, while the city has taken a position on training about that involves excited delirium, we found that the concept persists with some officers, and training as delivered must be accurate and in line with the city and MPD policies and directives about excited delirium in order to be effective, to remove that concept from the streets and not just from policy. Behavioral health calls continue to receive an unnecessary and a potentially harmful law enforcement response. And with that, I'll turn it over to my colleague, Sammy, to discuss the issue of accountability for misconduct. Thank you for joining us this evening.
Thank you, Kristen. Good evening, everyone. My name is Baram Sammy. I'm the Deputy Civil Chief here at the United States Attorney's Office in the District of Minnesota. I just wanted to first express my gratitude to all of you who are here on the Zoom listening to this important briefing. We really do appreciate your time. So in addition to the violations that you've heard described by my colleagues, as is customary in an investigation like this, we looked at the police department as a whole and identified several contributing causes to these violations. I will provide an overview of the issues we found with the city and MPD's accountability systems for addressing police misconduct. We've concluded that the city and MPD's accountability system has consistently failed to find, address, and prevent officer misconduct. Now, to investigate the accountability system, we interviewed staff of the Office of Police Conduct Review, called OPCR. We reviewed staff of MPD's Internal Affairs Division. We interviewed command staff at MPD, city leaders, panelists on police conduct review panels, leadership with the union, and of course, community members as well. We also looked closely at OPCR's complaint processing data provided to us by the city. And of course, we dug into the cases. We reviewed random samples of different categories of OPCR cases, over 400 that had been closed after 2016. This included cases that were placed into investigation, included cases that were dismissed at intake on the merits, called a no basis dismissal. We looked at cases that were dismissed for failure to state a claim, for lack of jurisdiction, and cases that were referred at intake for coaching. We found that MPD's accountability system has allowed meritorious complaints to be dismissed, often without investigation and often for no discernible reason. We saw significant allegations that were mischaracterized or ignored during the framing of the complaint. We saw serious misconduct diverted to coaching or retraining, and sometimes the coaching or retraining never happened. In general, OPCR's data showed us that fewer than 1 in 4 of OPCR complaints referred for coaching at intake resulted in coaching. As to cases put into investigation, we found significant delays in investigations for no legitimate reason, sometimes for years. Of OPCR cases opened after 2016 and placed into investigation, 53.1% remained unsolved for at least 1 year, and 26.1% remained unsolved for at least 2 years. We saw delays in interviewing officers, if they were interviewed at all, involved officers in the complaints. And we saw open investigations abruptly closed and dismissed with designations of reckoning period expired or failure to cooperate or no basis. And we often found case files that failed to document the basis for the dismissals, which sometimes appeared to reflect the length of the delay itself rather than any decision on the merits. We also looked at police conduct review panels. We reviewed policies in place for the operation of these panels, but found that those rules for deliberations weren't typically reviewed at the outset of panel sessions. And we learned from civilian panelists that during deliberations, sworn side panelists would frequently bring in information outside of an investigative file, including background and reputation information about the subject officer. Overall, we found discipline at MPD to be rare. Between 2016 and 2021, after removing complaints that were deemed by the OPCR to be duplicate complaints, OPCR's data showed that only 2.9% of complaints resulted in a letter of reprimand, suspension, demotion, or termination. When we limited that to non-duplicate complaints that OPCR deemed to state a claim within its jurisdiction, this figure is approximately 4.2%. Now, as to other contributing causes, we found issues with how MPD trains and supervises its officers, as well as issues with MPD's officer wellness program, all of which are critical to the department's ability to provide lawful policing to our community. Now, in the interest of time, I'll stop there and ask Cynthia to talk about the remedies we listed in our report.
Thanks, Barham. Our findings report concludes with a section outlining remedial measures to address each of the issues that we've discussed today. This section of the report is intended to provide a general framework, but it doesn't have the specificity we would consider appropriate for a consent decree. We've structured our report that way so that you, the city, police officers, and other audiences have assurances that even though we've identified serious problems, there are in fact solutions to those problems. As we mentioned earlier today, the city and MPD entered into a proposed settlement agreement in order to address the Minnesota Department of Human Rights, or MDHR, findings from its investigation. and their agreement is under review by a state court. But since our findings cover areas not addressed by MDHR, such as the First Amendment and the ADA, there will undoubtedly be reforms that we would expect for a federal consent decree that are beyond the scope of the proposed agreement that the city has with MDHR. Where there's overlap, we are assessing whether there's anything additional or different we believe is necessary to address our findings. We look forward to exploring efficient and effective ways to make your compliance with both agreements possible. To conclude, I will end by thanking you again for joining us tonight and for your cooperation during the investigation. I also want to ask for your continued support. The remedial measures that I've mentioned today are just a starting point. We need to build on those points to create a comprehensive consent decree that will improve public safety and protect the rights of everyone in Minneapolis. When we first opened this investigation, we encouraged people to contact us to let us know about their experiences with MPD. Now that we've completed our investigation, we want to hear from you about what reforms you would like to see. So again, we need to hear from you. We've put our 800 number in the chat so that those who joined late can find it easily. Please do reach out with your ideas for change. And as I said at the beginning of our presentation, we will be conducting outreach in the next few weeks to answer your questions and hear your thoughts. Thank you for your time and your commitment to improving public safety in Minneapolis.
Well, thanks everyone for tuning in. That was kind of a brief presentation from the Department of Justice personnel about the report, what they've been working on. So I'm just going to cover a couple of things about that. And then I think my colleague Nico is going to come in. And so Nico, I can't see your video yet, but maybe if oh, there's Nico. Okay, great. So give me 1 second to get the dually thing set up. Thank you all for tuning in. Again, this is Dan at Unicorn Riot. There we go. There's the dual shot with Nico. How's it going? Thank you for coming in, Nico. Let's see if your audio works.
Hey, thank you for running this. Thank you for showing everyone the webinar. I hope everyone was able to watch. I mean, it wasn't that much different than what we sort of already heard this morning, but it was a little bit more focused, I guess. So yeah. Yeah. What was your thoughts on it, Dan?
Well, I mean, I think it was kind of a summary form of this report that dropped out. I'll see if I can show that. Okay, there we go. Turn on your audio.
Perfect.
Okay, great. So here's the main report file. And we've got that linked on our website, unicornriot.ninja. If I go back here, you'll see it's linked on the main website. Farther down. Come on, buddy. Sorry, this is the first time back out with the video software again in a hot minute. But okay, 92-page finding report and the 4-page agreement in principle. So we've got that linked on our website. And, you know, as soon as I fired up my video software, I could also see one from the last major report that came out, which was earlier. The window went away on me, but there. Oh, here it is. So this was an earlier report by Hillard Heinze, March 7th, 2022, and the city of Minneapolis, the city council kind of listened to that one, but that was sort of a softball one. It seemed like it got criticized by a lot of the local activists, and so now, you know, this is a higher level DOJ report. I just wanted to mention, like earlier, we streamed how they received the last report, you know, and so, you know, it is questionable if these reports have a big impact. One of the community activists talked about the Kerner Commission report from back in the 60s and what happened with riots back in the 60s. So, you know, I guess, did you feel any sense when you went to the community press conference that people are optimistic that there'll be more accountability, that there'll be traction around these issues. Can you talk a little bit about all those community groups that came together earlier today?
Yeah, definitely. I feel like what I heard was an overall resounding, this is what we've been telling you. The community has been saying this for decades. The community has been experiencing this for decades. The community has been experiencing Minneapolis police brutalize Black people, brutalize Indigenous people at very high rates and much higher rates than their white counterparts. And so that was one of the main things that I think was continued to reverberate it throughout the press conference and throughout discussions that were happening right before and right after the press conference. I think most of all, it seemed like people were happy that it's happening. Michelle Gross was very happy that it was such a report filled with, you could say, valuable resources or valuable incidences. It only goes back 6-8 years, and that was another thing, 7 years at this point, 2016. Or actually, it was the 6 years, 2016 to 2022. That was talked about a lot as well. There's been a lot of incidents, obviously, as we said, for decades before that, and really since the Minneapolis Police has been around for over 150 years. And so that was talked about. Another thing that was talked about was, what does this mean? What are the follow through? What is following through with this? And we don't know yet because the consent decree really hasn't been agreed upon. And so another thing that was talked about a lot was having an independent monitor. Who's going to monitor the Minnesota Human Rights Department court enforced settlement? Who's going to monitor this now federal Department of Justice consent decree with the Minneapolis Police? These were, again, brought on by the incredibly ruthless behavior of the Minneapolis Police in killing George Floyd. But as we know, this is not a singular incident. George Floyd was not a one person that was just a random incident. This has been a pattern of practice by the Minneapolis Police, and that was continued to be talked about at the community press conference as well as in the DOJ press conference. And even as you heard just now with the webinar, it's a lot of whole blanket general statements about Minneapolis Police terror tactics, essentially. And these blanket general statements apply to mostly across the board with different incidences. And the reason why they can apply is because there's so many of these incidences, and the pattern is so vast at this point that it's hard to say that it's not the culture of the Minneapolis Police Department to be racist and to be violent. And so that's what we're hearing. It seems like, again, I want to point back to it, the independent monitor situation. Who's going to be monitoring this? Who's going to be looking at this? There's, again, the two agreements now that will be sort of court enforceable. The federal government is the federal government. The state is for the Minnesota Department of Human Rights. And both of them, I guess, will be looked at inside the city of Minneapolis within the structure of the District Court of Minnesota as well. Another thing that people were talking about at the community listening or the community press conference right after the original morning press conference by the DOJ was that it's not just a Minneapolis thing. St. Paul Police Department is the deadliest police department in Minnesota per capita, and Minnesota also has racist police officers across the state. And so people were asking and looking for potentially a nationwide decree against police use and police abuse, police terror, and police racism. And so that was another one of those big findings or as big discussions. And as you see on the screen right now, you have some of the starting of the report is a 92-page report. They have another smaller findings scale piece as well. And as you see, some of the precincts are listed right here with the population of Black folks that are living in certain areas of Minneapolis. And they end up breaking some of that down and then breaking down some of the incidences. And as we've said, and as we heard from the community, and if you didn't see those, the earlier press conference this morning or the community press conference, you can go back to unicornriot.ninja, or as Dan was showing you on our website right here, and check them out. But again, another one of the things that was mentioned at the specific community press conference was the lack of respect that Minneapolis police officers continue to show towards community, and how when they got put out, sort of put on blast as to some of their practices, they actually got worse. And as you see, even with the DOJ talking about how Minneapolis police stopped reporting race after George Floyd. Wow. Okay. And so like that really just shows where they were at, what they were thinking about. We know after that, during the uprising, they were hunting the community. After that, they continued to hunt the community. And those are words that they used, Sergeant Patel and some of the other riot response police officers. Some of them are now not in the office. Another thing to bring it back, and I'll kick it back over to you, Dan. One thing that was mentioned in the community press conference was sort of talking against what had happened in the DOJ press conference, where Mayor Fry spoke towards the end, as well as MPD Chief O'Hara spoke towards the end. They both called for and recruited for Minneapolis Police Department. They both had long recruiting pitches to the public. Come here and make our culture better type of thing. And the community was sort of, it seems like there was negative, you could say negative connotations from that the community felt. The community felt like that was a negative meaning, a negative push, a negative statement by the two leaders. The community felt dismayed by that in a way, in a discussion that I heard people talking, where they felt like the police and the power structure were using that instance to have all of this press on them as a recruiting pitch, when essentially this is about how the Minneapolis police have been terrorizing the community, and they then are in force at the end taking it as a recruiting pitch. So that was some of the main takeaways that I got from being down there this morning. Also, another interesting thing, during the DOJ press conference, they allow press. It was a lot of press in there. You sort of had to already go through a process. You had to go through a lot of security. You had to have the dogs came in before the press conference started and did a whole another round of security. Then they mentioned that there was going to be questions and answers at the end. Okay, we're all prepped with some questions. I know I had 3 or 4 questions ready. A couple of them almost were getting answered. And then they literally had a list. On that list is where they called the names. From that list is they drew up those names. Those people got called on. I think 1 or 2 of them were local folks. I believe Stephen with Star Tribune and Lou with Care 11. And the rest were, I believe, ABC, maybe New York Times, and maybe another 1 or 2 folks. And then they left. And so there wasn't an open ability for independent press, for local press, for other people who've been covering the Minneapolis police and a lot of what they've been doing to have that point to ask a question. So I thought that was very interesting. You heard King Demetrius Pendleton, who's been an independent live streamer for over 10 years, a long time in the Minneapolis community, providing community coverage. You heard him sort of say even this was the usual tomfoolery in reference to the inability for the authorities to listen to or to allow to independent press to field questions from them. So yeah, kick it back over to you. But what was your takeaway, I guess, overall?
Well, thank you. For me, I definitely think back to like the 2008 Republican National Convention, and that was when I got to know some of the activists that were in that community press conference afterwards. And we heard that it was about the violation of the First Amendment, that was one of the major issues that the Minneapolis police have perpetrated. And, you know, my question back to the political firmament of Minnesota is, well, did the 2008 RNC contribute to making these practices worse, making these norms worse? That was one question. Another small detail from the community press conference, I know one of those people that was participating also mentioned that I think they'd been sexually harassed inside the Minneapolis Police Explorers program, and then they said that either one of, forgive the detail, but they said that there was an officer that they were trying to deal with a complaint on, but they were also inside the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, BCA, sex crimes unit, but there was also like a harassment complaint against them. So that seems like a classic case of the foxes guarding the hen house type of problem in terms of extreme misogyny embedded in the police and stuff. So I think that there was a major theme from that community press conference, that it wasn't just about the Minneapolis police. They referenced the judges, the Hennepin County medical examiner, the Hennepin County attorney's office. What happened to Amy Klobuchar was a county attorney or acting county attorney. Tyon Burrell spoke as well. We've had stories about him. So I think that there, sometimes it seems like the government wants to say, oh, well, there were bad apples. Chauvin was a bad apple. Now the entire DOJ is saying, well, MPD is a bad apple as well, but the scope of what we're doing doesn't extend to the other departments in the state or how they interact or the other branches like the judges, the prosecutors, and so on. So do you feel like the activists are just, are they trying to raise that bigger issue and say it's not just the police, I guess? And do you think that, and we should also mention what Michelle Gross talked about, which is who's going to be the consent monitor, right? I think we heard during the press conference that she said that New Orleans had actually had a fairly good process in terms of consent decrees, whereas Chicago's had gone very slow. So the consent decree process does really depend on apparently whatever attorney gets this gig, which is sort of interesting. Can you talk a little bit about that and like what even is a consent decree? I mean, obviously neither one of us are lawyers, but that's sort of put forward by the federal government today as the big process, and there is a contract going on with that. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. I can't talk about the consent decree on top of it because of my knowledge of, as you said, not a lawyer, but we have the agreement right here, and the agreement, as you see, it talks specifically about utilizing Civil Rights Act, all these acts that have happened, American Disabilities Act. They talked a lot about people who were disabled, who the Minneapolis police encountered, and how police encountered them very violently, without respect, without treating them as humans. And you see the basis of this agreement, or this whole operation, this whole investigation is based off of these laws that have been created and codified into law throughout America. And then the DOJ is using those laws to say, hey, you're violating the law here at Minneapolis as a police force and a police department. And so that's just, I guess you could say, the overall encompassing reality of this agreement. There is no consequences as of yet. There is going to be negotiations that happen. From what I hear, it could take up to a year for those negotiations to happen, to where we do find out exactly like what actually this consent decree means. That's my interpretation of it. It seems like from the community side of what you were saying, with other departments and other entities apart from the Minneapolis Police Department, a lot of people were definitely echoing that. They were saying, this is just the Minneapolis Police Department. That's one small, tiny little department. Although they're huge in numbers and getting a lot of money and taking a lot of the money through settlements, and they use a lot of money for encampment defense, or like when encampment get evicted, unhoused encampments here in Minneapolis. I think they just put out a report recently that they spent nearly $375,000 just to supply police forces for 4 encampment defenses. So police are very, very expensive, and so a lot of people were like, this is very good that we're looking at the police, but also this is not just the police issue. As you mentioned, we have in the situation here in Minneapolis, in Hennepin County, the Hennepin County's attorney's office, who was privy in part where they actually are charging people. Mike Freeman had the ability to charge how many police officers, never did. There was an officer finally when Muhammad Noor shot a white lady. Basically, that we got charges against an officer, but it hadn't
seems
happened.
To be referenced today as well, right? And
yeah,
one little detail that I noticed in the webinar, but not I think, from the press conference was they did talk about the homeless encampment evictions. So I haven't looked carefully through this text yet, but it does seem the DOJ at least noticed something about what's been going on with the camps that have been shut down with pretty extreme force in Minneapolis compared to St. Paul, as well as compared to how other cities have handled this kind of thing. So we at least saw a reference to that. It's not going completely under the DOJ's notice, apparently.
Yep, I think one of the bigger ones that they were mentioning, they mentioned it a couple times, and they mentioned that actually in the first DOJ press conference as well, how the police reacted in March 2021. They continued to reference this, but they didn't specify what the incident was. But in March 21, when the police put their knee on another person's neck for an extended period of time, this was after George Floyd, right? We're talking about 9 months after, 10 months after George Floyd. This was at an encampment at Near North Encampment, which is one of the long-standing encampments here in Minneapolis. It's recently been evicted in October 2022. But Near North, we have a story about that as well. And the police tried to evict the encampment, and they were unsuccessful. And in the attempt, there was encampment defenders that were activists that were looking out for the unhoused, because they didn't want the unhoused to be having all of their belongings swept and thrown away at that point. And that's usually what the police do when they're talking about encampment evictions. They'll allow the people to, they'll give usually a 24-hour notice on a piece of paper. They'll stake a piece of paper into the ground, and they'll say you got 24 hours. Supposedly they'll send out, community support groups to try to get references and resources for folks, and then they'll raid it within the 24 hours, or the next 24 hours. And then when they do raid, a lot of times they've come in with their guns drawn, they've come in, very violently, and then they throw people's belongings out. And so May 21st, 2021, or in March 2021, there was an encampment defense out at Near North. And Dan, if you pull up the picture, I believe we have from the Near North encampment defense. I believe we have on the article head, on the other article cover image, and right here you can see what we have going on for one of our newest reports that actually talks about the monetary value of.
Yeah. Down here's the long list of our coverage about.
Yep, here's the long list.
These encampments. Go ahead.
Yep. And then if you go to the 5 arrested as Minneapolis police attempt raid on Near North House encampment, March 23rd, 2021, that shows where the police officer is actually putting the knee in somebody's neck. And so we have a report on that. So if you want to check that out, do it, please. But that was a reference. Literally, the police, the DOJ were referencing this specific incident when the police started just brutalizing people. And in that video, it's really wild because the police just start punching that person and just attacking him like really ruthlessly. And so that was one of the instances.
Let's try running that right now if the system cooperates with us. Let's give it a shot.
Mm-hmm.
Might not have.
And this was again March 2021. This is footage sourced by a lot of community members that were on the ground, as well as
pretty scary. There was residents crying. The look in their eyes was pretty, it was pretty scary.
I was appalled by the actions of those community members that attacked my officers. I am thankful that they were not seriously injured. When I see video of individuals on top of my officers assaulting them, and some were arrested and they should be.
It's just not true. It's just flat out not true. I would never believe that because this community is beautiful. We love each other. Yeah, we might have ups and downs, but I do not at all see members of this community at all attacking the police first. I know it's just not true. It's just flat out not true.
Get back! Get back! To be able to breathe perfectly fine, okay?
I feel like we have the right, it's our human right, and it's unoccupied space. And it's not like we're here bothering anyone. This is literally, some of us do not have criminal backgrounds like myself. Now, most, if not all of us, do suffer from mental illness, and we're taking care of ourselves. With us and the volunteers.
Minneapolis Police Department was not going about that alone. We were working in conjunction with other city enterprises, our health department, our CPED, and others to find adequate shelter for those individuals.
We went through the shelter system. We don't want to go through that. We want to be able to be the ones to make the change.
We're having a little bit of juddering with the audio playback, but you can check that out on our website. I just wanted to kind of give you a sense of that idea, what had happened, because the DOJ did bring that up today, and which was kind of striking. So the lens of what they were looking at was not just traffic stops; it was also protest enforcement and other incidents like that.
I did think it was also interesting that they mentioned only a specific set of incidences or a specific set of protests. I think they said something like 26 or something like that. I'm way wrong probably on the totals, but I felt like that's what I had heard them say, that they had investigated this specific amount of also protests and the police response to those protests. And if you think about George Floyd uprising and the protests that happened afterwards, after George Floyd was killed and throughout that summer, there was hundreds of protests. And so there was a lot of different instances where the police were very violent to community members. And a lot of it just really is, swept under the rug at this point or pushed to the side at this point.
I just wanted to pull up.
Bring this up.
Bring up the shame games, right? This was pretty striking. The DOJ talked about looking at a lot of different body cam videos, and similarly, we ran into this shame game story, which was very strange. This was published May 2021, and it showed a real weird culture happening with MPD, not just in terms of how they treat the public in traffic stops, but also how they treat each other internally. Can you just talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. What we uncovered with that was really wild. Give full credit to the person who got us the clips, but essentially there was an arrest that was happening, or it was an arrest. They pulled somebody over for making some noise on the freeway during the time of the 646 mass arrests. So 646 people were mass arrested in November 4th, 2020 at a post-election protest, and they were arrested on the freeway. What we caught here with this footage was on top of the freeway on the street over 20th Avenue. And this was a CART team, Chemical Agent Response Team, led by Sergeant Patel. And Sergeant Patel is also very renowned for, hunting people during the George Floyd uprising, as we mentioned earlier. He's the ringleader of this shame game, and he shames Lieutenant Gomez, who ends up becoming actually the 3rd precinct inspector very recently. He just became the 3rd precinct inspector, Lieutenant Gomez. But Sergeant Patel, as you can see, you can see him right there the night before while he was holding a semi-automatic rifle to people who were sort of protesting. People were getting mass arrested during a mobile dance party the night before. So anyway, Sergeant Patel is the ringleader of the shame games. And what happened was Lieutenant Gomez sees him while they're responding to that situation on top of 20th Avenue on the bridge. And a small discussion was had between them. Gomez dropped Dubois' name. So Dayton Dubois was a police officer, I think, in the 1st precinct or within the community outreach types of precincts, of job positions. And Dubois was actually from Canada and an old football player. So he used to play football back in the day, and he was from Canada. So he came here, and he had been, it looked to be from this culture and from these discussions, from this body cam footage, that they hated him. Essentially, this set of officers had a whole game that when somebody says the last name of Dayton Dubois, you have to shame that person. And so Gomez is in the conversation. He says the last name of Dubois. Instantly, Battelle and others, oh my God, oh, you said it. And from there, they brought Gomez behind the CART van, which is, the white Jump Out Boys van. and they brought him behind that cart van. As you can see right there, this is sort of how it looked. They brought him on the other side of the cart van, so on the left side of that, and they shamed him. And it was Battelle who was like, shame, shame, shame. And essentially what we tried to do is we tried to get some comment from all the officers, and we didn't get any responses. But we did see in some recent FOIAs that we got that they had circulated this story amongst each other to show each other that other officers were talked about. But we still haven't got a response from the police about this. So essentially, this is part of their inner culture, where an officer who might not be on the ends with some of the violence that they're doing or some of the approach that police are doing when it comes to people, it seems like other officers then make fun of them and have this culture of depicting them as a softy or whatever else. And so essentially they shame other officers. And so I talked to a couple officers actually after we put out this piece during Winston Smith time. And it seemed like an officer was saying, well, we don't have to like everybody we work with. And so like that's also the culture of it. Like you don't have to like everybody you work with, and then you're working with them and you're making fun of them, and you're a Minneapolis police officer, and you're supposed to give the community respect when you're making fun of your own coworker. It seems like that culture in itself contradicts each other, and you wouldn't be a respectful human being if you can't respect your coworkers. So you probably wouldn't be respecting the community who you probably view as whatever you view it as, based on the pattern of practice of white Minneapolis police officers and their racism. You could only assume what white Minneapolis police officers would think of when you're looking at a community who might not be white. So that's my thought about the culture of the MPD. You heard Brian O'Hara talking about he's the new police chief from Newark, and if you look at Newark when they did their consent decree. And their whole changeover of their public safety stats of that are pretty impressive. If you look at Newark police officers, the shootings, it's very low. If you look at Newark police officer killings, very low, if any, since that consent decree and since their changeover. And so if you look at some of those things and you could see, okay, potentially we have a positive, outlook moving forward. We have this chief who had this track record of actually impacting a little bit of change statistically. I don't know anybody in Newark to talk to them at this point and get an attestment to that. But when it looks like you have somebody with that practice of pattern of stamping out some of the negative patterns that other police have had, potentially we have something brewing here. It was mentioned that somebody wanted to know what would happen if we have new players. 2024, let's say the consent decree gets agreed upon, that's negotiated. We're talking about maybe a year from now. So maybe in 2024, let's just say May. So then in 2024, we also have a new mayor election. We also have potential new police chief. We also have potential new Department of Public Safety head. We also, so all of these positions that are right now filled with the people who are doing the work because this was their responsibility as running the city, these folks might be out. And so what happens then to the consent decree and to this DOJ agreement and to all the work that the community, that the federal government, that other folks have been putting in? Another thing I just want to really quick mention is towards the end of the community briefing, it was asked if the DOJ provided any monetary support for community organizations that were sort of holding some of these conversations. And no, not at all. Michelle Gross was quick to say, no, we wouldn't ever accept that money. But also what was very interesting, in my opinion, was young Jerome Treadwell, who runs Minnesota Teen Activists, came out and also said that he, as Minnesota Teen Activists, they provided space for the DOJ. They provided this space and this opportunity and the table, and the DOJ didn't fund any of that. They don't reimburse for any of that. So essentially the community had to go out of its way, put funds in other places, expenses, to allow the DOJ to come in and maybe listen to a couple of things that the community would have to say. Obviously, it has benefit in the sense that you need to have the community to talk to these folks. And CUAPB put on many listening sessions during the end of 2020 and into 2021, into 2022, to get as much information as they could from the community about police brutality and police terror and instances. And that was a very interesting part, in my opinion, that came out sort of at the end, where it's like, oh yeah, and actually to have these meetings with the DOJ and to procure the time and the space, we as community groups had to like foot the bill and the time and the energy for all of that, and they just sort of came. So that was interesting.
I'll just mention a couple other previous stories that we had, because I saw some links to those today in a way. Sweet. One was the folks at the press conference also talked about being spied on, kind of without predicates. And so this was a story that Unicorn Riot ran back in 2019. We found, basically we did a bunch of deductive work because a FOIA request kind of showed the username that the Fusion Center, the Strategic Information Center, which is run by the Minneapolis Police Department, shares intelligence also with the FBI, with the Minnesota state level Fusion Center, and with the Criminal Information Sharing and Analysis Unit operated at the Hennepin County Sheriff's Office. And we've since learned, thanks to contributor Sam Richards, that is the Hennepin County Sheriff's area is where facial recognition has been routed to in Minnesota. So anyway, this was an older story, but basically by looking carefully at the FOIA request, we were able to discover that they were using a particular sock puppet to monitor, and they were using Angel Garcia Lone Tree as a sock puppet at the Minneapolis Fusion Center. So that was a story we did earlier.
Yeah. No, and we have another story on this coming out soon, based on the exact same precedent, where we did a FOIA. We find out some more information of Minneapolis police sock puppets and Minneapolis police investigating protesters. Yes, so stay tuned for another one of these. But yeah, like I'm really glad you bring this up. This wasn't really talked about specifically, I don't think, in this agreement, in this webinar, in the DOJ discussions, but it was heavily talked about in the Minnesota Human Rights Agreement. So
interesting.
Glad you bring
That's
that
a
up.
good point.
Yeah.
So there
and
was,
then to
that's really
one last thing on that.
That was a third report, right? Because the other one was that law firm thing that I brought up earlier.
Okay, yes.
So I'm trying to almost enumerate what all these agreements are. But it was this one. So the Hillard Hinsey was the
so that's
city's
mostly an
report.
after action review, right? And so like that's not even, maybe it's not a report. That's an after action review to the response. And then the Minnesota Human Rights, but it was, so everything is so related to George Floyd because the human rights investigation was literally a response to George Floyd's killing and to the reaction to the community. So, but yeah, I think it was just the human rights one is now a court enforceable agreement. The DOJ will be also a court enforceable agreement. I'm not sure that after action is a court enforceable agreement.
Gotcha.
So I guess that's the only difference.
That makes sense. And that was sort of like whatever the mayor was talking about in terms of merging both monitors. Is that essentially the idea that's in play here?
Yeah, it's merging the Minnesota Department of Human Rights Monitor and now the DOJ, because there are going to be two agreements. And then and then that's where the community also wanted an independent monitor. They didn't want a monitor from the Department of Justice. They didn't want a monitor from the city of Minneapolis. They wanted a monitor from the community. And so that was also interesting. To touch last thing, go back real quick on the Minnesota Department of Human Rights investigation, and in their findings, part of the surveillance that the Minneapolis police was doing was against Nikema Levy Armstrong, and they actually ended up going to one of her birthday parties and sort of crashing it. And so it's just very interesting when you're looking at 2018, 2017, 18, this was during that time. And this was also the time that Ms. Nikema was about to be running for mayor, or was running for mayor, and also was like in the midst of receiving a bunch of flack from the community. And so then at the same point, she's being heavily surveyed by the Minneapolis police, who are like intimidating surveying her at her birthday party. So that's like literally they were talking about how they were surveying people on their emails and following people through social media, and actually they took it a lot of steps further in a lot of different ways. And so it's very interesting also when you look at both of the investigations together, and let's say you combine some of these things, you still don't have a full picture of Minneapolis police and the brutality that they've inflicted on the community. And that's the real wild thing, because you can have these massive investigations and massive reports and still not encapsulate the whole truth.
Yeah. And one of the other little weird loose ends is I was sort of wondering why Andy Luger, the current U.S. attorney, didn't even appear at this thing. That's sort of an odd absence, considering. Maybe we'll find out, maybe not. Another thing, they talked about just now in that webinar, they talked about 40 millimeter marker rounds. And I'll just go back to one of the older reports that we did back in 2016, which shows that the Federal Emergency Management Agency Center for Domestic Preparedness has a standardized battery of tactics and sort of suggested equipment for controlling protests in the United States. This is an important program to know about, and a lot of these crowd control tactics you're going to commonly see at major protests. So we have that up on our website if you want to check it out. It's under the FEMA trains local police for field force crackdowns back in 2016. I just wanted to mention that because they were talking about the policing of protests and the weapons, but this roster of weapons is suggested by the federal government. So, it's a small irony there. Just wanted to throw that in really quick at the end. Was there anything else you wanted to add? I kind of figured otherwise we might go out by just playing back the reporter reflections segments, run a couple of those. Those were kind of consolidated views of what happened over sort of those early days. Is there anything else you wanted to add as we go out today?
I found it interesting that they mentioned protesters a lot, and they mentioned press a lot, and they mentioned how the Minneapolis police were targeting protesters violently and targeting press violently. They only mentioned a couple instances, but it was very interesting that they were able to put that into the report, because the community continues to see every day, every single day, community lives with it. Black folks live with this trauma, this danger, this continual trauma, and to have then the ability to also say, oh yeah, protesters and press were also getting abused. I thought that was good, but I also felt in a way that it took away some of the magnitude that the Minneapolis police actually does against the community itself. So I just want to bring that sort of back into focus that, it's, although press, I've been shot a few times now by 40 millimeter marker rounds, beat by police, multiple times while I'm doing press activities, but also while I was working another job, I got beat up by the police. And that had more impact on me personally than while working and getting violated, or getting injured by the police. And so that I know from experience and other people talking to them in Minneapolis, that the community feels like the police are the problem. The police have been terrorizing the community, as they said, for decades. And so I think it's due time that the federal government comes and says what the community has been saying. The police are racist towards Black folks, towards indigenous folks, and towards other folks. And it's high time the federal government makes something, some form of accountability process, some form of consequence. Something needs to happen to where other lives can be saved. And so that's where I think the good thing, that's what we hear from the community a lot. And then personally, I think that that's where the good thing is. I think that potentially this agreement, just in itself, just talking about this, it makes other police officers potentially not kill somebody tonight. They might not kill somebody tomorrow. Statistically, the Minneapolis police are due for another police killing very soon, if not, a couple weeks ago. So let's hope that these agreements and these discussions and this culture is starting to wither. The agreements and the discussions are starting to wither away some of the negative culture. We know that it won't be, taken out all the way, but essentially the community is calling for a whole new idea and a whole new imagination of community public safety. So, but yeah, we'll go to the reporter's reflections, and thank you, Dan, again for running this. Briefly on the reporter reflection, we will still have two more episodes coming sometime in the near future from the reporter reflection. And again, these are synopsises of each day. Episode 1 is day 1. Episode 2 is day 2. So we're talking about May 26, 2020, May 27, 2020, and then the tumultuous day 3, where Mike Freeman, the county attorney who was mentioned multiple times at the community presser, where he actually came out and said there's not enough evidence to charge any of these officers for killing George Floyd. And that night, the 3rd precinct got lit afire. And on episode 3 of part 2, which is the 4th video in the reporter reflections, you can hear a lot of community introspection after the precinct got lit. And you hear from George Floyd's friends, you hear from community members, as just to why they're out there and why they felt that that moment was important. And I think that that's a perfect way for us to end this discussion, because, or even just end this stream, because as you mentioned, we're going to bring it back, because that's essentially where some of these reports generated from. Obviously, it came from the killing of Minneapolis police, killing George Floyd, right? And then from there, we had these instances. But you can see the passion that the community had and the pain that the community felt from these decades of oppression. So very glad. Thank you for running this, and thank you for including me.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for running down those things. I'll just mention another really key thing about the 3rd precinct, which is mentioned in this report as well, is the biased policing against American Indians, the Native American community right around in that area. Certainly that's not news to people who know what's happening in the streets of Minneapolis, but I think that the wider world, people that don't track these things, I think it's got to be a wake-up call to the folks that haven't been listening to the activists that have been trying to put this out for many years pretty consistently on a regular basis. So I do think that in that sense it's kind of rare that these kind of things don't often get highlighted by the DOJ. The DOJ lets many things ride, as some of the activists pointed out at the press conference today. So, so it will take a while for the consent decree to even be going in, and to find out who this supposed federal monitor is as a supposedly important in-between figure, making sure that the local government does what it's supposed to. So anyway, thank you so much, Nico. We much appreciate your work down on the ground today and getting those filmings through and all that. So we really appreciate it. And so now we're just we'll mention really quickly, Unicorn Riot's a 501c3 nonprofit media organization, so you can support us at unicornriot.ninja/donate. That would be much appreciated. We produce this work on kind of an ongoing basis. We have written pieces, we have people that have been contributing stories from all over the world, so you can support us at unicornriot.ninja/donate. And so this is the new post that's up covering what happened today, but we've also got some international stuff. We've got a Cop City demo down in Arizona. We got one on the Minneapolis May Day. We've been following the Atlanta City Council and the Cop City situation. We got a piece about Cambodia. We got the landing pages about the Uprising, about the Atlanta Forest, about the Solidarity Bond Fund organizer arrests that happened earlier. And we also have a summer merch sale that just launched earlier today. So that's going on with Threadless. And we got some nice new summer styles going on there if you want to help support us. Again, it's a 501c3 nonprofit, and it's your support as donors that enables all of that. So thank you all for joining us. And thank you again, Nico, for calling in today. We much appreciate this as a pretty big day when the DOJ actually took some steps that are pretty uncommon regarding Minneapolis. So thank you very much. We're going to go over to those reporter reflections in a moment, and we really appreciate everyone for tuning in. Thank you.
Thank you all. Have a good night. Good weekend.
on the ground screaming for my brother. He's talking about he need to breathe, bro. I walked over there, I'm like, damn, what's going on? I look at the man, bro. He's on the ground. He's screaming for his life. He's trying to breathe, bro.
Immediately after George Floyd was murdered by the Minneapolis police, there was a vigil that next day. The vigil was about maybe thousands of people in the street that started on 38th in Chicago. There was a lot of community rage you could see and feel. Even though COVID was happening, there was a bunch of space in between people, but yet there was moments where everybody was sort of smashed into where the speakers were, and some of the speakers were having difficulties trying to control some of the emotions in the crowd.
We want this man arrested. We want this police officer arrested with his partner, not suspended. Because if anybody out here committed a felony or heinous crime, they would be in jail right now. He needs to be in jail right now. So let's go to the police station and make sure we get arrested.
So the vigil ended up marching down 38th Street and up Hiawatha to the 3rd precinct, where the officers were employed at.
I feel hurt, I feel betrayed, I feel not safe, and honestly I feel like I'm not wanted in this country at all. Fuck the state, fuck the city, I'm not wanted in this country. I feel underrepresented, I feel fucking pissed off, I feel like I want to fucking burn some shit down right now, and honestly I don't want to see no police because I know I'm going to fuck some shit up when I do see them.
George Floyd! George Floyd!
On 32nd Street in Hiawatha, we saw some of the first interactions with police. It was one car with 2 officers in it, and people started to direct their rage against that one car, started to throw things, started to smash on the windows, and that car ended up having to move back out of the intersection. And there was a lot of people who came in the middle of that to try to quell what people were emotionally showing with their actions. Right after that, we heard multiple people saying, you can't police my emotions.
Don't throw nothing. Don't tell me what to do. Don't tell me how to express my rage. Fuck them.
Once people got to the precinct, there was people who surrounded the precinct. There wasn't a police force on the outside, and the police were on the inside, some of them in riot gear, but some of them not. The people immediately had surrounded the precinct. There was people who were guarding the precinct to stop people from smashing windows and from spray painting on the precinct, but that quickly was sort of pushed aside as tons of youth and community members that were really angry and grief-stricken at what they saw the day before. They sort of came and swarmed around the precinct. There was a few windows that were shattered.
There goes the window.
It's kind of tough on it, like, to actually, I've looked at it once, I couldn't watch it again, you know, because of the tragedy, because of what I seen, how horrifying it was, how the power we don't have, like, what we can't really do anything about that because they have the badge, you know?
Gawkers and onlookers was explaining to the police that this guy is dying. The police got more emboldened to inject more pain and inflict more pain. And it's almost like he didn't want to give up the power that he had at the time. You understand what I'm saying, man?
From there, people moved into the back alley, and they took their anger out on a police cruiser, just demolishing it. From there, there was a police parking lot in the precinct. The door got opened somehow, and people then swarmed into the parking lot and started taking out their rage on the police cars, as well as the individuals' cars who worked at the precinct, as that's their parking lot.
Piece of that shit.
When that happened, I immediately knew that that was going to be sort of a tipping point for the police to then react, because they hadn't come out to react yet. They came in full force with a few riot squad vans, with the white vans and the jump out boys, and they came out to sweep the area. They shot a lot of flashbangs and less lethal munitions and a lot of tear gas. When they first came, we were still live streaming. We were sort of stuck where the alley is in the back of the precinct. The police came to sweep that area, and there was a press standing next to us, and that press got batons to the neck. He expressed himself as press, and he was still attacked.
Whoa, 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 whoa! Hey! Yo! You do not need to do that! No! You do not, he's a press! He's press! He's press! I'm press too! Press! I'm moving!
Spoke to him later, and he felt that he was specifically attacked because he was black.
It was crazy because there were so many police that walked past us, and that one officer that singled me out made a beeline directly at me. And I'm not one to play victim. I'm not one to be like, woe is me, right? But I did feel singled out in that moment. I was the only colored person in that area. I'm not quick to say that by any means, but that's what it felt like to me. I'm just glad that I responded as opposed to reacted, because I was very freaked out.
Then the police tried to take control of the other parking lot. There's two parking lots, one that was locked, one that was open. They then pushed into those parking lots, pushing everybody back to Snelling Avenue near the Arby's, and shot a lot of tear gas. Probably the most tear gas I've ever seen shot in the Minneapolis or St. Paul area during any time in the recent past. Then it started to rain. The drizzle started to happen, but that didn't really stop the people pushing forward and continuing to fight. It was tit for tat. A lot of people on the front lines were putting their hands up. People on the periphery lines were throwing rocks and water bottles at that point, and the police were shooting a lot of less lethals.
There goes more tear gas on that side. Morgan shot at the people that were lined up. Heads up, heads up! People are throwing some of the tear gas back. Police are shooting with rubber bullets and marker casings. Tear gas is really thick. Really nobody brought a gas mask that I see.
Now is not the time to run. This is when you stand strong and let them know that we will not take this any longer. We will not take this any longer. When the cops get away with murder, you know, and everybody wants to be peaceful, this is about as peaceful as it's gonna get.
We took enough of this. We didn't care then. We got our foot down now. We tired of this.
Here goes more getting tossed.
I really do hope that the cops get indicted and be convicted of the murder that they got away with.
See what they do to us? See what they do to us? They macing us for no reason.
If it's war they want, we'll give them war. If they don't want to give us peace, hey, peace killed our brother. Sitting down, not doing shit killed our brother. We're not gonna get them back. They're gonna get their cars back. They're gonna get their building back. They're gonna get their shit back. We're not getting our brother back. So it's fuck the police to the death of me. That's on my mama.
Some fireworks were shot, and the police were then using less lethals to shoot back at people who they thought were throwing rocks.
We got sons, we got uncles, we got nephews. That's not right. They supposed to provide. They supposed to serve. They don't care. They shrug their shoulders. They don't care. Like, where's our justice? That ain't right. Period.
It was like the battle at Snelling and Lake, where Target carts were used as barricades, as well as the bus station, and at one point even a semi was used as a barricade to stop police from shooting people who were throwing rocks or projectiles. And the police were shooting a lot. I got shot at twice from standing where I was. I was not throwing things. I had specifically, you know, a camera rig in one hand, mic in the other. And one of the times I got shot at was one of the less lethals came right directly towards my head in the bus stop and broke through the bus stop window.
What the
And only moments later, maybe a minute or two, is when I got shot in the arm. And I got shot in the arm after a person got shot at with a less lethal. And the glass, it went through the glass of the bus stop, because they shattered the glass of the bus stop by shooting their projectiles through, the police did. And glass then went into the person's eye. I reached down to film it and see if he was okay, and at that point is when I got hit.
Ah! He's not even in the video! Big time.
The rain seemed to quell that night's push for more action as it started to rain really, really hard. Liquor store across the street from the Minneapolis 3rd Precinct was looted. At the time people were expropriating what they wanted out of there was a moment where the police then came out finally for the first time onto the street from inside of their area where they had originally sort of been on the sides, and they had set up barricades along the sides at that time too. What we saw there was a few people that were going inside and out of the liquor store, and then we saw the police reaction to that. They sent in a SWAT unit. The SWAT unit came with concussion grenades, threw them into the store, came in like they were clearing the area like an Iraq war zone. We saw very violent arrests at that point as well.
Get on the fucking ground! Get on the ground! Get back! Get on the ground! Get on the ground! Yo, what the fuck? Do you see that? What the fuck was that? What the fuck was that? Dude, do you see that? What are you saying?
Why are they punching him? Why are they punching him? The police are punching him in the face multiple times.
Do not kill him, please. Do not kill him.
That was just the first night. Things continued all night that night. People were doing a bunch of different things in a bunch of different manners that led to what we saw the next few days.
Tonight we matter. Tonight we do. Tonight we matter.
Shit not gonna change unless we take a stand here. We don't leave right now or the next hour, even the next hour. We stay here all night if we have to, and we come our asses back tomorrow if we got to. And the next day, and the next day. Shit's gonna change, it's gonna change the next day.
History in the making. It's only the beginning, okay? Only the beginning. That's fuck, we're tired.
The second day, I specifically came out into the field and saw that police were on top and around the precinct, and they were sort of shooting at people. People were building different barricades.
My family fought for this country.
So basically, man, military personnel is supposed to be out here to support the people. Who gonna protect us against those that are supposed to protect us? You know what I'm saying? The military. The military is supposed to be out here protecting us, standing front line. Yeah, I got my firearm on me. Yeah, I got a 100-round drum. Yeah, I got the dirty in the pocket. I know what's up. I'm not going. I'm not going. I'm shooting back if they shoot me. If they shoot y'all, I'm shooting back. If they got y'all down with their knee in your neck, I'm coming for them.
You can feel it. You can feel it yesterday. You can feel it today. All day it's been like this. Helicopters overhead, shots, tear gas, vandalism from the community. People, that's the only way people fighting back at this point is property. And property does not equal George Floyd's life, the folks say. And so this is where we are right now. We're here in Minneapolis on Lake Street in Minnehaha.
Don't shoot! Hands up! Don't shoot! Hands up! Don't shoot!
And
and they're shooting right where the injured people are. The person is not moving their eyes. Their eyes were wide open and they were not moving them. And the police are shooting more on this side. They're shooting at people.
Yep, they are. People who were in the front lines were doing a bunch of nonviolent, like standing with their hands up. They were getting shot and maced. That was making the crowd more enraged. The people in the back then were throwing projectiles. Medics were helping everybody. Medics were also getting attacked.
None of that. Why is that? Rubber bullet, man. I still got it. They shot me twice, and I'm a kid. They shot me twice, and I'm a kid. They don't give a fuck about nobody. See, here's the fucking bullet that destroyed my knee. They don't give a fuck. They don't give a fuck about none of us. Fuck the police. They don't give a fuck. Stop killing us. They mad. We got water bottles, some glass, some rocks. They've been shooting at us. We've had our hands up. They've been macing us. They've been tear gassing us. They've been throwing flashbangs. They're either murderers or they're fucking protecting murderers.
Reporter live. We in Minneapolis, baby. 651, 612, east side in this bitch.
You know how we coming out here. Talk to us.
When the AutoZone got set up on fire that second day is when the police again came out of the precinct area. They used that opportunity to push the crowd back a few blocks. That then pushed the vandalism further. Every time the police made an incursion on a different area or specifically attacked a different area, it seemed like the crowd then filtered out. People were spreading in different neighborhoods, and also that was pushing the police to not have enough backup or to not have specific opportunity to cover a specific area, and then was distracting them from other things. So all of these things were playing part.
up here.
Yeah,
Nobody up here
right,
threw
yeah.
anything at him.
Yeah.
So that's what we see continuously.
Yeah.
My name is Julio Rosario.
BTMC.
Cousin of Brian Quinones, BTMC. Got killed by the police last September 7th, 2019. It's fucked up what they're doing out here, man. We gotta stand up for our rights and stick with our people, you know? We can't let them do what they do and us not do anything about it. We all gotta stand up and we gotta make a change. We gotta be the same.
I can't breathe! I can't breathe! I can't breathe! I can't breathe! I can't breathe!
100% 10 toes for George. We are here to support all throughout it. Nobody should have went through that. He had handcuffs on. He had handcuffs on. He did not resist the whole time. I've seen multiple videos. He did not resist, and they still felt the need to kill him. Somebody lost their life just living their everyday life, literally. Literally, it is sad. And yes, my community is tired. My community is tired. As you can see, that's why we have a riot.
We shouldn't have to come together like this. This is sad, really. You gotta stop doing this to us. We need justice. How does man get killed like this?
He did not deserve to die. I know him personally. He's a good man, man. He don't deserve.
You knew George?
Yes, I did.
Yeah, you want to talk about him?
He's a good man. He worked hard for his family. He's a good supporter. He didn't do nothing wrong. He never did. He did nothing but give back to the community and help the community. If anything, he'll give his last dollar for anybody. The cops are wrong for this, man.
The change need to be now, because Donald Trump, Joe Biden, those ain't the answers. So something's gonna pop. This gonna be a long summer. It's gonna be a thick winter. We going into some seasons. So this is a new norm. Get used to the shit we on here, because we out here. Real shitty.
Wow, they just shot somebody in the leg right there.
That's what that is. Commentary right there, my man. They just shot fam in the face with the gas pellet. That's what they own. They don't care about us. That's inhumane. They don't care. This is an inhumane practice. These people, it's not even it's a lack of humanity. It's not even about racism. It's not even about capitalism. It's not even about colonialism. It's about a lack of humanity, man. All this shit is a consequence. I feel bad because these is businesses, but this, man, it is what it is. Put your money where your mouth at is. When you come back, when they buzz your insurance, let's see what your model look like after that. Every one of these is gonna get Recopa insurance. Every business got insurance on here, so this is capitalism at its finest. These people ain't gonna take no losses. That police department's gonna come back with more officers, more shit. What are y'all gonna do though then though? It's time though. It ain't about no carry, conceal and carry. It's about what we gonna do with the guises. We have to change. We have to abolish the police. We have to change the narrative, man. We can no longer have a lot of the systems we have, man. I ain't got all the answers, man, but get involved, man.
This is the community out here that you're seeing right now. This is Southside. This is Minneapolis. And, you know, our people are dying every day. So, you know, this is what happens when you keep killing our people. This is what happens you see here. So this is a warning for the entire world that, you know, you need to stop murdering us. You need to stop murdering our people.
Mama!
Stay tuned with Unicorn Rock.
Hands up on our knees.
Police.
Hands up on our knees. They maced me.
Hey, look what they did in my leg, bro. Look what they did in my leg, bro. I'm 16 years old. They shot me, bro. They shot me, bro.
Our hands are up.
You see what's happening?
Until
we get justice, we ain't Hey, but they not gonna stop me. They not gonna stop shit.
Fuck the fucking police. How about that? George Floyd. You understand?
There's an officer actually taking a piss
Who are you to judge? Who the fuck is that?
right next to a fuck 12.
Y'all caused this shit. Y'all caused this. What are you? Y'all backing out the fucking broken system that's hurting all of us. Y'all backing that shit.
Whoa. He was gone. He was gone.
Fuck you, bitches! Fuck you, bitches! We still want you!
They beat the mess out of the game, and you see them walking into the precinct.
We gonna fuck up some more shit. Y'all might want to bring y'all piggy asses down here. This shit ain't over, bitch. This is what the fuck y'all created. No justice can be.
The police have lost all control. They don't have any control of the situation. They don't have a protest leader to try to tell that they need to keep their shit together.
I feel like the streets, man, is finally taking a step that we need to take, coming together and fighting these motherfuckers that we need to fight, bro. They evil. You feel me?
This bullshit right here, this shit should have been happening a long time ago. So, I'm gonna put it to you like this. Fuck the police, you heard me, in the Boosie best words, you heard?
Corporate stores were lit on fire and looted, with the goods expropriated and brought back to the people who were on the front lines. We saw that with Target, we saw that with Cub.
Yeah, listen, I know all this shit is fucked up and they're doing all this shit. Look at the fires, bro. Look at all the fires. But listen, this is what happens when you kill our people. You can't be killing our fucking people.
Rodney King 2.0, they fucked up.
It's fucked up out here, bro. This is where we from, and we destroying our own city. But there's a reason, man. They got us fucked up.
RP to everybody that lost their life to the police, man. That's what this whole thing is about, okay? Don't get misconfused because everybody fucking shit up. We out here for one reason and one reason only, man. Justice. That's it. George, rest in peace, man. We forever got you. Fuck 12, MPDK. You know how we rockin'.
It's gonna take bloodshed. We done talking. It's time to act. People are tired of it. You know, we tired of the games. I'm ready to die tonight behind this shit. I don't care. My kids here. I got 5 kids. There's no way they're gonna do that to my kids.
Right here, we're in front of Gandhi Mahal, minority owned. Nothing is wrong with the windows. There's a bookstore across the street. Moon Palace Books. Didn't get touched. Corporate institutions are on fire. The condo, brand new condo installment. Not anymore. It's up in flames. AutoZone is done for. Wendy's is up in flames. We're here in South Minneapolis. This is Nico from Unicorn Riot. This is the community's response to George Floyd being murdered by the Minneapolis police. The police are taking video while they stand by.
A lot of fires are being lit. One of the biggest fires I saw was the apartment complex that was being constructed in front of Aldi. The flames were so hot on that people had to continuously move away.
I see across the way at Target, there's still tons of people out. Still tons of people in front of the precinct. And this is a massive fire, my gosh. Oh my gosh, it's so hot.
People weren't really sad, people were sort of gawking at it like, this was the rage that we are feeling now, please hear us. When I talked to other people on the scene, that's sort of what they were displaying to me in their emotions and their words.
Yeah, I love watching a condo burn. I'm okay with this.
Hey, we deserve this. We deserve this. It's the least they can do is watch the city burn.
Hey, man. At least it keeps us warm.
Yeah.
The takeaway that I took from it, all these fires that were spread that second night, it seemed like they were specifically from the community and specifically rageful.
Rest in peace, George, man. Rest in peace, George. Things can be fucking replaced. Things can be replaced. A life can't. George Floyd, Big Floyd was fucking murdered. This is gonna keep happening until something fucking changes. This shit'll be replaced in a fucking year. He's still gonna be gone.
Rest in peace.
Man, tell them motherfuckers to quit fucking over niggas, man, and quit playing the motherfucking games, man. We ain't having that shit no more. We've been asking, praying, begging on our hands and knees, and motherfuckers still don't respect us. The man crying for his mama.
I can't breathe.
I can't breathe. You know what I'm saying?
I can't breathe.
Like when they shot Tyrell Nelson in his motherfucking back. You know what I'm saying? Been doing that pussy ass shit, nigga.
Stupid
and motherfuckers is finna play with you now. You know what I'm saying?
Gotta start realizing that it's more than politics. We out here for us. We human beings, you know what I'm saying? Look at this. Look at this shit. You cast around, you see all this shit, man.
Y'all at the wrong places, man. Take this shit up there to Cup Foods. Cup Foods has been extracting money from our community for years. They don't care about black folks. They own the whole fucking block. They are up there monopolizing. They came up there to try to hand out some water like they were doing something for the community. They don't give a fuck about us. They're protecting that store. We're out here burning down this fucking street. Burning down. Where we gonna go grocery shopping in the morning? Where you gonna get your baby Pampers in the morning? Y'all doing the wrong thing. I just had to go knock and bang at people's door down at fucking Foot Locker because they burning Foot Locker down and there's people upstairs.
It's terrible. Seriously, it's sad, man. It's really sad, man. At the end of the day, you know, we lost a brother and we lost the whole neighborhood. This is replaceable. All this is replaceable, you know what I'm saying? The life, when you take life, you can't replace it, you know what I'm saying?
I've never in my life seen no shit or thought I would ever see some shit like this. First of all, this is like the Rodney King riots. This is history we're witnessing right now. We got coronavirus, we surviving, big punk ass Donald Trump, and a fucking riot in 2020, all of that? What? You can't tell me 2020 ain't been one of the craziest years that you've ever experienced in your fucking life, right?
The civil unrest is a long time coming, and I never thought I'd see it, you know. Minneapolis is a very nice place, it's multicultural, it's progressive, you know, and even the rioting, they're polite rioting. You know, this is a polite riot. I mean, this is my first riot, you know, but...
We're showing our anger finally without going to social media about it.
What else are we supposed to do? Like, I feel like we've already tried, like, the peaceful way and, like, what else do you guys want us to do?
How does this feel as a youth coming out here seeing this?
It's real messed up, bro, because it hurts. And for me being 20 years old, having a kid, being in the streets, getting shot, etc., and coming to see this still happening as before I was even born, and actually witnessing the stories that they were used to tell us as youth, and it's still accelerating. It's not dying down. It's not doing none of that. It's still accelerating the world.
It's as if the stories are coming to life.
I feel like this needs to be because America ain't woken up yet. This needs to be a wake-up call, and I hope it is, truthfully. I hope it is.
George Floyd should have never happened. There was too many officers on that scene, even the dispatchers and everybody that can hear it on the radios. I mean, it's a shame. What happened to that man, I mean, come on. The bottom line is, if it was a chain of command from the top down, they all should step down.
I'm sort of guessing the shots were fired at the precinct.
Yo, come on.
I could be wrong. There was a ton of shots fired. People have hit the deck over here. I mean, shots over here isn't super uncommon. Like in the middle of an uprising, shots were being shot in the air all throughout Target continuously. There's a bunch of tear gas up here. Another one was thrown. Look, officers are definitely ducking. Running when they move. They're really all ducking. The police are under siege in Minneapolis. There's no other way to say it. Their department has been under siege for 2 days. The precinct, I should say. They're done with the tear gas for the night. He just said, give us a reason.
Is that what you're asking for? You're asking for it? You're asking for a reason to shoot a citizen? You fucking coward!
Motherfuckers about to get in your ass, nigga. You tired of getting on our knees praying and turning the other cheek, nigga? Fuck that.
Hey, we want justice. We don't want peace. RIP George.